My name is Dean, and welcome to Theo Live, a live YouTube show airing every Monday where we talk about theology, church, and culture. Now let's get into it. Hey, welcome to Theo Live, episode number, I don't know, because I stopped counting. Oh boy. Welcome to the show, though. Today we are talking about platforms. Everybody's got a platform. I have a platform now. It's called YouTube. YouTube is my platform. And you guys watch, and so do I deserve it? It's hard to know sometimes, right? Well, Christianity has a lot of platforms, different conferences, different publishers that will elevate someone's books and give them a platform, an ability to be able to reach more people. Now, the problem with that idea, you might think about it and go like, well, platforms are great then, right? Because you're getting the gospel to people. You're going to be able to actually have some following for some of these good leaders to be able to get good resources into the hands of good people. That sounds great. The problem is that a lot of Christians who have been platformed didn't deserve it. They didn't deserve it, and they showed that through their actions. And I think that Christianity has a problem right now with who we're platforming and who we are giving that ability to be able to go out and to reach people. Now, maybe it's a little bit different than YouTube. Like everyone has a platform through social media, but like these Christian institutions that have conferences, that have websites where they, invite like almost like the elite, if you will, to come and to write articles about different subjects, different biblical subjects. Should these guys be given platforms? That's what we're going to be talking about today. But before we do that, we have something that I feel like I need to talk about, because a lot of times I'm dealing with stuff in the U.S. A lot of my audience, a lot of you guys are from the United States, and that's fantastic. I'm originally from the United States, so I have a lot of love for people in the United States. But sometimes it's really easy to just focus on the U.S. and what's happening there, and sometimes I forget. I've got my own problems here in Canada. So over the next couple weeks, I want to be dealing with a few of these more Canadian problems. And I'm not just talking about the line at Timmy's, okay? All right, some of you guys are like, the Tim Hortons line is going to be too long. You're going to deal with that, Dean? No, we have our own serious problems. Now, if you are familiar with the Canadian landscape as far as evangelicalism goes, you will know that there's not a lot of big names. I would argue that there are really only two. There are two big names right now, and one has been around for a while, and one is a newer one. So the newer one would be James Coates, because everyone knows who he is now because of going to prison and being the first pastor to go to prison for assembling the gathering. And there's a couple documentaries that are being made, and eventually I will be discussing that because I have some takes probably a lot of people are not going to like, but I do want to talk about it at some point. But today we're talking about the other one, because for the last few years, there's really only been one, I would say, one actual mega church in Canada, because churches here compared to the United States are much smaller. In the United States, you have tons of mega churches, tons of churches that are over 2,000 people who gather there. So here, it's a little bit different. We don't have that many. We have a few. Most of them are out east. As you go west, you're probably not going to find, I think there's one in Winnipeg. Let me know in the chat if you know even where Winnipeg is. But none here in Saskatchewan. And then in Alberta, I think you have a few in Edmonton and in Calgary. And then as you get into BC next to the coast, all of a sudden you have a few more. But there's not many. And there are not many that are well known. Pastors, at least, as far as like authors and things like that, we don't have a whole lot of that. We have one guy, basically, over the last decade that I feel has been like one of those kinds of figures. And unfortunately, you might know who he is because of this. because of something that's been going on, and I haven't talked about it. I made a video, actually. It was the night that the John MacArthur stuff broke, about the whole covering up, I would say, of different things that were happening there at Grace Community Church way back in the day. Things related to Eileen Gray, all of that. That stuff broke the same night, and I had actually recorded a video about this story. But I decided, I'm going to put the one about John MacArthur out because I felt like that was a bigger deal for a lot of people. And I think in the long run, I was right. But that's not just like I'm telling you that because I felt like it was important back then. I just didn't know of a time to drop that video. I was still figuring out scheduling and things like that. But now we have some concrete proof. Like at the time, this was back in March, I believe, that an accusation was made, or at least made known to everyone else. I think it was back in November. There was an accusation of abuse from Bruxy Cavey. Bruxy Cavey being the megachurch pastor of really one of the main churches as far as that goes. Like I would say like the banner church of Canada would be the Meeting House, which is like a quasi Mennonite kind of church mixed in with a lot of Pentecostalism. It's a very unique theological camp, okay? But if you were to watch some of their services, you'd probably be like, oh, it's like this church and that church. So they have a lot of that kind of appeal. But the theology was troubling. It was troubling back in the day. There was TGC. I had Wyatt Graham, the executive director of TGC Canada, on the show a couple weeks ago. Me and him are buds, but that's not to say I agree with everything that the Gospel Coalition Canada has ever done. And they had some articles where they were talking about Bruxy Cavey in a very positive light because of his views, or at least despite his views on the atonement. Bruxy Cavey has some very problematic theology when it comes to the atonement, and saying that penal substitutionary atonement, throw it out the window. He's got like a warped Christus Victor view that's like, it's a whole thing. Maybe I'll talk about that at some other point. But he's been problematic for a while theologically. Now, back in November, it was told at least to the church board there at the Meeting House. This is over in Ontario, by the way. So very far away from me. For those of you who are like, everyone in Canada knows each other, right? No, not at all. So over in Ontario, that's where they're at, and they have several campuses. It's not that big. I think it's like 5,000 people altogether. So that's about as big as we get here in Canada. But back in November, stuff got told. There were accusations made known to the church, and then he stepped down for a while. And it wasn't really said what was going on until I think it was in December. They let people know that there was an investigation going on at the church. And I think it was back in March they announced what this investigation had revealed. And at the time, it was basically just said to be like an affair. Like that it was just an affair. But now we have come to find out that it was abuse, and a lot of abuse, different kinds of abuse, maybe not as horrific as some of the stories that you might hear, but still anything when it comes to abuse is horrific. And so the reason why I want to bring this up is because I want to be fair, as I'm talking about some of these stories. Some of you might be like, I've never heard of this guy. I'm just saying it's really important for us here in Canada. And like when we're talking about platforms, I think this gets into the issue. Actually, Joe Thorne is here in the chat. And I remember, because Jimmy Fowler, the other co-host of Doctrine and Devotion, is, or at least lived in Canada for a while. I think his wife is Canadian, and they actually had a conversation about Bruxy Cavey and plagiarism, that he had come in and told Jimmy and the rest of that pastoral staff about, using other people's stuff. And Jimmy was like, what? Like, that's crazy. Those are the kind of things, like you get a little bit of, here's a little crumb, here's a little crumb. All of a sudden you find out something horrific. And sometimes it's really hard to see where those crumbs are and if there's any connection to anything bigger. And sometimes there just isn't. A lot of times there just isn't. But there were things that could have been looked at with Bruxy when it came to his theology, when it came to the way that he just took things from other people and used it, and how flippant he was about that. And that wasn't just in that podcast. You could have talked to a lot of different, looked at a lot of different sermons, and he could have found that out pretty easily. But there were things that people overlooked. And there are things that Christianity right now is just overlooking when it comes to giving someone a platform. And we see this right now, really, with what's going on over at Saddleback Church with Rick Warren's successor, Andy Wood, and a problem that's come up with his platforming of Mark Driscoll. So let me hop into here. I was in a rush today, but I do have some things I want to show you that I did not share over into this. Let's say hi to some of you guys while I'm trying to also figure out how to send some things over to my iPad while I'm doing this. So Joe's here. He says the bouncing dean head. Do you like that in the timer? I thought it was pretty fun. You know, for those of you who listen just to the podcast, I have a timer before the stream. Eventually, I'll probably get rid of it, but I find it's a good way to have people come into the stream and start to interact so I don't run out of things to say right off the bat. It's nice to have a little bit of a buffer in that way. So I made a new one that I thought was kind of funny. Just having my head bouncing around. But Proverbs 17:11 is here and says, God bless you, Dean. And then setup looks good, bro, from Joe Thorne. Yeah, not too feminine, right? I told you, earthy, masculine. It works. If you're here, I see some of you guys already doing it, but if you're here, hit that like button. Let me know that you're here, that you're watching, that you care. It makes a big difference, especially when it comes to people being able to see that Dean is live. That's the thing. You got to have YouTube let people know, right? So John Adams is here, though, and he says, man, bouncing Dean head is the best, right? I thought it was funny. I was a little nervous to put it on because I didn't want people to be like, dude, this guy has so much pride. He's literally just putting his face on everything, which is it's my channel. So I'm going to put my face on a lot of things. But yeah, I thought it was fun. I don't know about using Bunyan as an end table, though. Here's the thing, Joe. I use those all the time, by the way. So he's commentating, again, for the podcast listeners. He's talking about the set. It's just to put it in there somewhere. I want to put things that are oh, okay, you know what it is. And it worked, right? It worked. Don't argue with the results, Joe. You knew what it was. People who know, they know. Proverbs 17:11, Dean rocking the boat is biblical. Springs Church in Winnipeg. Okay, yep, that's the big one there. And Joe, Canada's population is smaller than California's. That might be part of why there aren't many celebrity pastors. Yuck. That and Americans love idols. I would say that is a more problematic, like a stronghold for people, like a trap that people fall into in the U.S. There is something about that. But also here in Canada, I have a stream about Canada's evangelism declining. It was way back in the day. It's not very good quality, but if you want to know more about what's happening here in Canada as far as where the gospel is going, it's real bad and we need help. So send help. But it's not great. So I would say, yes, the population thing is true, but also statistically, it's way less as far as how many people are Christians, how many people attend gospel preaching churches, how many gospel preaching churches there are. This is a real mission field, and it's a mission field for everyone who lives here, and it could be an opportunity for maybe even you watching this to know that, people need help there in Canada. People want to send people all across the world. In the United States, they want to go somewhere in Africa, somewhere in Asia. They want to go there. Well, just up north here, we could use quite a bit of help. Steven's here and says, "Oh no, I was late. What have I missed?" Not much. Just kind of setting the stage a little bit. Julie, hello from South Wales, UK. And as a rule, if a pastor is off theologically, chances are he will go off morally. I would say sometimes that's true. I wouldn't say that every time that's true. That's what I was saying with like the breadcrumbs. Sometimes, breadcrumbs lead to more breadcrumbs, and all of a sudden there's a loaf sitting there, a rotten loaf. But sometimes it's just breadcrumbs, and there's nothing else to follow after. So I would raise an eyebrow, when it comes to someone who's off theologically. But that doesn't always necessarily mean that morally they're going to be off. It might just be that there's a difference of opinion on something. But sometimes it definitely is true. All right. So all that being said, let's look over here and see. This is something that Andy Wood, who is now going to be the pastor, one of the lead pastors, him and his wife are going to be the lead pastors of Saddleback Church. And the reason why I think it's important to talk about is because of some things that he's getting a little flack for, and I think he deserves it. Because here he was. This was last year. Now, this was right before The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill came out. But this was Mark Driscoll getting platformed. Now, he's been platformed before this after him leaving Mars Hill there in Seattle. But this is why it's important, is because Andy Wood was one of those guys who was like, he's got a lot of wisdom to share. Let's have him come to this leadership conference, which I always go like, like leadership conferences, like you'll never see me at one. Nope. I'd rather go to a conference where we're talking about the Bible and exegeting scripture and just having sermons. Leadership conferences are more going to get you into camp of like mega churches and people who think that they're executives and all that kind of stuff. But he came and he spoke at this leadership conference, which everyone was like, that's problematic, even when, it was announced that it was happening. But, it's just some random guy. But now he's given a huge platform. Andy Wood has been given like this gigantic platform. Now, is it as big as Rick Warren said when he was on the floor at the SBC annual meeting? Maybe not, but it's huge. And he has platformed Mark Driscoll, which Mark Driscoll, I've said it many times here on the show, unqualified for ministry. Has not repented of anything in the past with his very abusive behavior that's well documented both in that podcast, The Rise and Fall of Mars Hill, but also, in people's stories and different articles. Warren Throckmorton back in the day showing a lot of that, different pastors coming out and saying this happened. He got kicked out of Acts 29, his own organization. There's a lot of evidence to say that he is unqualified. It's not just me randomly looking at someone and saying, hey, I think this. That's based off of a lot of different people who know him. And so that being said, this is problematic, right? Well, now that he's been given like this big platform, people have been speculating or going into his background and investigating, like, what has he done in the past? That's always the way it's going to be. People are going to come at you if you have a platform. Even me on this channel, sometimes people want to come at me about my patriarchy stuff, about the Doug Wilson stuff. And even as I mention it, there are going to be people who are going to come for me. And that's fine. I have a platform here, and you're welcome to come and have a conversation about what you think. Now, don't be a jerk about it, because I will block you. And even if like Joe, you start talking about my set and calling it names, I'll block you too. No, I'm just kidding. But this is what he came out and apologized. I should say that. Andy Wood, just the other day, apologized and started talking about how the reason why he had and I should have pulled it up for you, but you can go and find that tweet pretty easily, I'm sure, just on Andy Wood's thing on his Twitter. But he apologized for platforming Mark Driscoll, and his explanation for that, his excuse, was to say that he was having conversations with him to show Mark Driscoll's mistakes, and now he sees that that's kind of problematic, and so he apologized for his error. So I do appreciate that he apologized for his error, but mixed in that, I don't throw around big words about people's character, but that was a lie. I'll say that. From my perspective, I thought that apology was a lie because he didn't come and speak about his mistakes. There's documentation of people who were there and took notes and know what Mark Driscoll said at that conference. He was talking about leadership. He wasn't talking about how I failed in this way, in that way, in this way. No. Rather, he just said, hey, this is what I think about leadership. So I don't take it as having conversations about Mark Driscoll's failures. And then Warren Throckmorton pointed out this tweet. But as we have seen, it didn't have quite that effect. Here's Andy Wood in 2016. So if you look down here, this is a little less than a year after he resigned from Mars Hill. This is before he planted Trinity Church down, I think it's in Scottsdale, Arizona, somewhere there in Arizona. But this is from Andy Wood. So this was at his church, Echo Church. Unexpected lunch Monday with my mentor, Steve Stroop, and unexpected coaching with Pastor Mark today. It's been Wisdom Week. So sometimes what you post online is going to come back to bite you. And this doesn't look like sharing failures when you're talking about Wisdom Week. And very much saying like, look who came and coached me today. I'm sure they don't do that every time a leader comes in, but it's Mark Driscoll. So he was very happy to have him there. And so he took this picture. So like that apology, I don't know about that. So I say all of that to say we have a serious problem because we have these leaders who step up and they all of a sudden get platformed. And sometimes we don't even know why, other than that they're popular, other than that they have a following and people want to use that. And so you get leaders like, I would say even Andy Wood here, this like even saying like, this is the reason why it is. And like that he had Mark Driscoll come, and it's kind of clear that that's not exactly the accurate truth. I am very much aware of like, that's very problematic if someone is willing to say something like that online and contradict themselves. There might be other things when it comes to leadership that are going to be problematic there. So yes, a lot of people would look at him and, look at female ordination there at Saddleback and at Echo Church, and how his wife is also a pastor, and they would view that, obviously, coming from a more conservative theological place, look at that as something that's problematic. But also character-wise, there's something going on here. But that brings us to a good question. Like John Adams is here. He says, hi, Jonathan Michael Adams here. So adding a little bit more from our chill stream the other day. If you didn't watch the chill stream, you can go back and watch it. We had a bunch of fun there. How long do you think someone should go through a vetting process before being cleared to be platformed? Any thoughts on what should go into that process? This is a very good question because that brings up, all right, if there are people who should not be platformed, and we could think of it as like there are a couple of different categories that I thought of with leaders. The first would be inexperienced. These would be people who haven't been in the trenches of ministry. And honestly, like I'm not throwing shade at any other YouTubers. I'm just saying, like for me, I would have a very hard time listening to someone even in their basement talk to a camera if they hadn't been in ministry, if they hadn't been even like an elder at a local church, they haven't been through the trenches, I would have a very hard time listening to them about talking, how to live a Christian life. I want some of that experience. I want some of that ability to be able to know what it's like to see different people be discipled in the church, to know the failures that come with that, to know the hardships of what it's like to be in charge of a church. Now, I'm a congregational rule guy, like my buddy John Bunyan back there, but there is something to that of being an authority figure within the church. If someone hasn't been that, I would have a hard time reasoning why I should listen to them about something. Now, that's not to say that, women who have taught at seminaries, for example, or who have been in women's ministries and different things, I'm trying to walk around the broken glass of complementarianism. But there are different examples of people who would be someone to listen to when it came to different categories. But for the vast majority of people, when they're thinking about these people who are platformed, you're thinking about people who give sermons at conferences and write these blog posts that are very pastoral. So I'm really focused on that pastoral side. So, professors and just random speakers of different ministries, Jem Wilkin, people like that, I'm kind of putting to the side, and I'm really focused on pastors, okay? Someone who wants to go and speak to pastors should be a pastor, should be someone who has been in the trenches and not be someone who's new at it. So an example of where this has gone wrong would be Joshua Harris, someone who hadn't been in ministry for long when he was platformed. Actually, before that, he was a teenager when he wrote that I Kissed Dating Goodbye. Very problematic to have very young leaders to be thrown into the spotlight like that. Now, he did have a leader who was attached to him, C.J. Mahaney, and all of that, but he was platformed too early, did not have the experience. And I'm not going to get into that could have resolved things going down the line and all of that or saved that, but I'm talking about the listener. They could have been saved some pain. Some of you guys watched Joshua Harris and were impacted, and then when he left the Christian faith, that had an impact on you. And so that's what I'm talking about, saving you from that impact. It would be wise for people who are in charge of platforming to think about the experience that's attached to people. And then you wouldn't have maybe some of the stories like Joshua Harris. Now, another aspect of that is the character, and I would specifically target the idea of pride. If someone is prideful, you should not platform them. I don't know why that's such a big deal and controversial for some, but just the qualifications in 1 Timothy 3, they should meet them if they're going to be a pastor. And of course, if they're going to be platformed to speak in front of other pastors and speak to the church as a whole, the universal church, so other Christians, I think that they should be qualified. And part of that is being gentle. That's a qualification of a pastor. And if they're not going to be gentle, if they're going to be prideful, if they're going to be arrogant, if they're going to be focused on themselves, they should not be platformed. This was a problem with Carl Lenz. He had huge pride issues. It was clear to everyone around. Well, why was he platformed then? Well, there were issues that were in the institution there with Hillsong and all of that led to him being platformed. But someone who is like that, who is arrogant, who is prideful, who is focused on their appearance, no, that's not going to be helpful for them. And it's not going to be helpful for the listeners for them to be thrust into that position of being platformed. Another example of this would be uneducated. And this is where I get a little bit controversial because, John's here. We did a stream a while back talking about seminary and how we both came to the conclusion, even though I have 2 seminary degrees. I have an MA, I have an MDiv, I have my BA as well, so I've been educated, but I don't think that it's necessary for a pastor to have gone to seminary. I think that there are other routes that we can take for them to be trained so that they can rightly divide the word of God and can counsel effectively for the congregation to be that faithful under shepherd there in the local church. I think that there are other avenues that we can take to be able to make sure that they are qualified to do that as far as their knowledge goes. So I'm not saying all education is bad. And specifically when it comes to platforms, I think that you should go a little bit above that. So while I wouldn't say that, someone in the church who wants to be a pastor, that they have to go to seminary, if they want to go and they want to teach on this like higher level, if you will, of being able to talk to people who are traveling thousands of miles for them to come and be a part of this conference, and specifically pastors who would come to this conference, I think that they should be educated. Because I think that there is a humbling process that someone goes through when they're educated and when they have to turn in actual papers and they have to be told, man, you really messed up on this paper. Your thoughts about this theological framework are a little bit off. I need to educate you a little bit more from a professor to that student. That student is gaining a little bit of humility. And to then also have that attachment of, okay, well, I need to research this history of the Christian faith in order to have even like footnotes to put into this paper. I think that's super helpful for someone who is going to be on a platform to be able to understand a little bit more about humility, as well as being able to have a little bit more of that connection to the history of the Christian faith and not just be thinking about their own church, their own senior pastor, or maybe the last 100 years of what Christianity has gone through, for them to have a bigger picture of what the church has done over the last 2,000 years. I think that's super crucial in order to being able to handle things and to be able to be a little bit gentler in approach when it comes to some ideology that is coming out, something new that everyone else is freaking out about. Someone who has been a little bit more educated maybe knows, oh, well, that's just like this heresy from back in the day, and be able to bring that to the forefront without having to go on to gotquestions.com and be able to find out what is this heresy. They could just know it. I think that's super important to be able to have that for someone who's going to be platformed. So someone who would be uneducated would be someone like Mark Driscoll. Mark Driscoll, I think at the end, he was trying to work on something there, and I think he was like, whatever that, is it Western Seminary that's in Oregon? I think at the end he was trying to, but he was very brash, like he was about a lot of things, but saying that, I didn't go to seminary. I don't have a degree in that. I think he had a degree in public speaking or something like that from UW, University of Washington. But I think that could have saved some of the listeners from that if there was a little bit more education. So that's probably something that's a little bit more just me and my personal feelings. I wouldn't go too far out on a limb with that one, but the other two I would say are absolutely necessary. Do not platform people who are inexperienced, people who are arrogant or prideful, and for me, I would say people who are uneducated. I think that that's going to be a problem down the road. So before I get into who we should, and leading to a conclusion on John Adams' question about like what are some of the things that should be done for people before they're given a platform, let's check in with you guys here in the chat. Julie Mays, J Mac is definitely idolized and he accepts it too as far as I can see. I'm not going to speculate on all of that. I think that a lot of people have a lot of problems with a lot of leaders and looking at them as like the end all. And if they say something, they're going to take it as gospel truth. I see that with J-Mac. I see that with a lot of leaders. So I don't think it's just him. Philip made it yet again. Mea culpa. Listened to the song this morning, talking about what we discussed on the Chill stream last Friday. Armac, Julie Mays agree, especially always having his adoring buddies always with him. Phil Johnson, Justin Peters, Todd Friel. Yeah, I would say that there are problems with the people who only go with like 4 or 5 people all the time and they always go to the same conferences and speak together. It's very easy to surround yourself with yes men in leadership. I can say that from experience, seeing the problem of yes men in leadership, and it's good to have people who are going to stretch you a bit. So while you might not agree on everything theologically, it's good to have some of those differences and a little bit of accountability, even built into some of those like circuits that people go around and speak at this conference and that conference and this conference and that conference. A little accountability from other speakers, I think, is helpful. So Raymond is here. It seems like charisma is the thing that sells the most. Absolutely. I think that's the major problem underneath all of this is that popularity wins the day for platforming in Christianity right now, or at least over the last 15, 20 years. And I would probably, looking back in history, I'm sure that there's like tons of examples that you can give of people who were platformed too early. Here's a controversial thought for you. Should Charles Spurgeon have been a pastor at the age of 16, taking over a church that was legendary? All right, New Park Street Baptist Church. That church was legendary. You look at the line of pastors in that church. Should Charles Spurgeon have been a pastor at 16? Now, like obviously Spurgeon is my guy. Okay, super super intelligent, all of that. But I look at that, and as someone who preached at the age of 12, like someday I'll really get into the weeds about that one. I would say I was not ready. I was not ready to preach when I was 16. And I have a hard time believing anyone is ready to preach at 16. Now, it doesn't look like that had an effect on Charles Spurgeon. Thank the Lord. But what a temptation. I'll say that. Philip. Not being a pastor or elder, but simply preaching a sermon. What are your thoughts on laymen preaching without any training or education? I would default to the 1689 on that. 1689 gives a little bit of wiggle room. That's 1689, Second London Baptist Confession. This guy right here, it says that elders should be the ones who preach in the local church because they are qualified. But when you're trying to give someone opportunities to preach and maybe train to be an elder, that the elders have that ability to not necessarily ordain, but to allow them to fill the pulpit. So they would leave the pulpit to the elders. And so I would default to that and say, yeah, I agree with that. So I think if someone is going to continue to preach on a regular basis, not just in just like training to be an elder, I would say that they should be an elder. If the church is going to act like they're elders and treat them like elders, they should be elders, and they need to be qualified for being that elder. No, but seriously, talent seems to be focused on more than character, but we as the people who platform these individuals are to blame as much or more than the people we critique. It exposes our groupie ways. I would agree with that. That talent seems to be more focused on that than character, so popularity, like I was saying. But there are some, we do have the ability to not go to things or to not listen to things. That's true. But I think the greater responsibility lies with those people who are hosting the conferences, who are developing those platforms to be used, who have the websites, that there should be a lot of accountability, responsibility taken by those organizations to make sure that the people that they're putting in front of you and me are going to be qualified, that they aren't falling into these other categories that we see, and not just being, oh, well, they're popular, so we're going to use them. Because the thing about it is, you and I don't have the ability to be able to know the in and outs of all of these people. Now, we can do our research, and we should, about who these individuals are before we're just listening to them all the time and promoting their stuff. Of course, we should do that. We do have a responsibility, but we don't know their daily life like those other people who actually have interaction with them and work with them do. So I think that they have the greater responsibility there. Dinah is here. Side note, Dean, the background aesthetic is awesome. I need your decorator's number. Well, that would just be me. And no, I don't give my phone number. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I appreciate it. My set, I like it. Still need to do a little bit of changes, but I'm a tinkerer. Stephen, I felt like the Western Church suffers from a nasty case of nepotism alongside a cult of personality. Yes, I believe that is true. Let's go down here. John Adams, a 16-year-old back then was like 35-year-old now. I mean, yes, as far as lifespan goes, and we know that Charles Spurgeon died young, but I don't think that they were like more intelligent, although Spurgeon was a unique case. I will give you that. But I don't think that there was all that much difference between a 16-year-old then and a 16-year-old now. But I get your point. Philip, I'm pastor, elder, and I've allowed people to preach from our body. It requires a lot of intervention and guidance on my end and the other leaders. My opinion, though. I think that having the ability as an elder to say, okay, I need someone to fill the pulpit this week. You have like a deacon or someone in the church that's, maybe they've been in pastoral ministry before. Maybe they've been a lay leader somewhere else. I think that you can give them that opportunity in emergency scenarios, or maybe, like I said, training to be an elder. But for me, if they're going to continually fulfill that duty of an elder, then I believe that they should be qualified to be that. And if they're not, then you should find someone else to do that. Maybe another elder from another church, have them come and travel. But that's my opinion. That's what the 1689 says. All right. So all that being said, let's talk then about who to platform. Well, a lot of it would just be the opposite of what I just said. So not being inexperienced, not being arrogant, not being uneducated. But I would say maybe a little problematic going with like the Charles Spurgeon thing. But I think older. I don't think that when it comes to a lot of these institutions that are so like ingrained in society, Christian society, I don't think that you should have all these young guys going. That they should be a little bit older. I think of people like Tim Keller. Now, as soon as I say that, some people hate him. I don't know why. By the way, I've seen the articles, so don't send me stuff. But I love him. I've been really blessed through his ministry, and I think like thousands of people have. But he wrote his first book when he was 58, like his first real book, Reason for God. That was back in 2008. Okay, he was born in 1950. He's 58 years old when he writes that book, and is really thrust into that platformed position. And then TGC comes along and all of that. But like, as far as being like a name that a lot of people know, if you weren't in New York City, it was probably through that book. And so like, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, of not being platformed until you're a little bit older, have been through a lot of the ups and downs of ministry, can look back on problems and be able to reflect and say, like, this new problem, that's just like this other thing that I faced. And being able to resolve that and not be freaking out. And when you're freaking out, you lose a lot of your patience. You probably aren't going to be, and here's a word that some people hate too, as winsome as you could be, as persuasive as you could be. And I think that someone who's been through the grind of ministry for a long period of time is probably going to be more helpful to pastors, young pastors, older pastors, than someone who has been a pastor for 4 years. I think that there's just something to that. Now, that's not to say that only old men can be pastors in a church. I don't believe that. You need to be able to have that balance of youth and age within the church. So sometimes that looks like a 24-year-old being the pastor of a church. So I'm not saying that, but I'm saying when you're talking about this platform, this elevation, I think that the qualifications should be elevated because there is more responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility, right? That's what Stan Lee said. I agree with it. And so I think that older and wiser people. So I think of people like Mark Dever. I don't agree with everything that Mark Dever has ever taught, but I think you would be a fool to look at Mark Dever and say that he isn't wise. There's a lot of wisdom there on how to do ministry, things that he's thinking through. Even I remember from him talking about his sermons, and he goes through like this thing every Saturday about his illustrations, of making sure that his illustrations fit every one of these categories of people who belong to his church. So a mother, what should they get out of this sermon? A father, what should they get out of this sermon? In the workplace, what should you get out of this sermon? And just goes through like this huge thing. That's so wise. There's so many things that like he thinks that a lot of people who are my age, for example, that I would never think of. And I think that has a lot to do with wisdom. And that doesn't necessarily come with age. I feel like that's just a little bit different. He's been doing that for a long time. You need to look for those people who are a little bit wiser. And then those who have been experienced. Now, I'm going to say something that some of these people, some of you guys are going to love. Some of you guys are going to hate because I've talked a lot about this guy. And while I disagree with a lot of things, and there are different things that are going on behind the scenes at his church, things that have been reported that I think are very troubling and shows that there's a lot of errors that are happening there at Grace Community Church and Master Seminary and all of that kind of stuff. But you can't look at John MacArthur and say that he is inexperienced. And I think that he gained a platform through his theology and his experience in that local church. And I think that's the kind of attribute you should be looking for in someone who's going to be platformed, that they have that experience. Now, you could argue whether that's good experience, bad experience, but I'm just saying experienced. And then education. You should be educated. You should be someone who has gone through the rigors of academic study if you're going to be on that platform. Now, sometimes that will look like someone who's been in the ministry for 36 years and has gone to different training seminars, and maybe they got like their theology degree from an institute. I'm not talking about necessarily like letters on your name, so you have to have a PhD to be at this level. But I think that you should be educated. You should be reading. You shouldn't be someone who just does like not just talking about books and pointing at books and being like, look, I like John Bunyan, or look, there's Bavinck over there. That's great. I love that kind of stuff. But people who can actually like quote you, like what did John Bunyan say here? You know, like people like that. And I think of people like John Piper. Now, again, I'm not recommending all these people and saying like every aspect of their ministry are things that I agree with. I'm just saying that people who would fit into those kinds of categories are the kinds of people that should be platformed. If they're educated, they're experienced, they're wise, they're older, I feel like those are some of the attributes. I would be interested to know, like in the chat here, or maybe down in the comments if you're watching the replay, let me know what you think are some of the qualifications that should be in place for those who are going to be platformed. Now, getting back to John's question, he was talking about like how do you know? He says, hi, and we'll just read it again. So, hi, Jonathan Michael Adams here. How long do you think someone should go through a vetting process before being cleared to be platformed? Any thoughts on what should go into the process? Well, I would say that like first have one. Like I feel like a lot of these institutions could have saved themselves a lot of heartache, both for themselves and for the listeners, for the audience, for those who are in the chairs in front of the platform, that they could have been saved a lot of heartache, confusion, a lot of just everything. They could have been saved from a lot of danger had they gone through any kind of a vetting process. Sometimes with these things, I've gotten a peek, okay? I'm not saying I'm an insider. I've just gotten a peek behind the curtain a little bit on different scenarios in the US, here in Canada, all kinds of places where I've seen a little bit of what it takes to get onto that platform, to have a book published, to see all that stuff. And a lot of that is just who's popular. And what is the biggest name that we could get for this thing? Who is willing? And some people even look at that with their church. Who would be willing to be our pastor? And if it's a big name, they don't even care about like, oh, well, we don't need to do a background search on this person because it's that guy. That guy's big. He's willing to come here to our little conference, you know, like that kind of a deal. So having one would be like the first thing. And then, you know, I think that it should be at least similar, you know, for anyone who has been in pastoral ministry. At least, let me put it this way. For anyone who's been in pastoral ministry, this is how it should have been for you to get that job. It should have been months. You know, I've been through processes of becoming a pastor where it was like the longest one was literally 8 months of me talking with this church, talking with the leadership team, having different, Skype things, having actual meetings, getting to know these people, coming and speaking at the church several times. 8 months. Now, do you need to do that for every conference? No, but there should be something like that. It should not just be a phone call of, do you want to come? Well, let's do a little bit of an investigation. Let's talk with the leadership at this person's church or institution. What do they say about this individual before we have him come and be platformed here? Because they should have responsibility in their audience and being able to say that, yes, we promote this person's work. And let's be clear about something. If you're going to have a speaker come on a stage, you are promoting their ministry. They're like, you might look at me and go like, Dean, that's the funny background in you. No, there's a difference between sitting on the same stage necessarily and saying like, this other speaker who's at this conference, I agree with everything. But if you're going to have this person come, like you're the promoter, you're the institution, you're having this person come and speak, you are promoting their ministry. You are saying that this person is someone you should watch, someone you should listen to, buy their books, listen to their sermons, view their seminars, whatever it is, you are promoting them. And so you do have a responsibility. And so you should have some kind of a vetting process where you're talking to the other people who have been impacted from this person's ministry. Talk to their staff. Talk to other leaders in their church. Talk to church members in their church and say like, hey, what do you think of this person? And if there's problems that come up, well, then don't platform them. And that doesn't mean that person has to get fired. It just means that they shouldn't be someone that you're saying, I am promoting and saying that they are good in this scenario, that they should be listened to, that they should be watched, all of that. So I think that it should be time. It shouldn't be a hasty decision. It shouldn't be based off of popularity and metrics. Sometimes that comes into play. You do want, if you have two qualified people and one is more popular than the other, it'd be foolish to not pick the more popular person who is also willing to come and be a part of this. That's not what I'm saying, but it shouldn't just be based off of that. If you have an unqualified, but very popular speaker, and you have a not quite as popular but qualified speaker, well, that should be your choice, because you are just asking to be impacted from this person. That's also a part of it. That person is going to have an impact on that institution. So it's not just about the audience, even though that should be the primary focus. It's also about the institution, not just of reputation, but impact. They're going to start to shape things that are going on. And I think that's actually kind of clear with what you heard in the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill when it came to the Gospel Coalition and their relationship with Mark Driscoll. Both James MacDonald, Mark Driscoll, I feel had hands on that organization and shaped it a little bit. Now, not fully. I'm not saying that they were the masterminds or anything like that. But I think that people who come and speak for an institution, that they have that ability to, almost maybe having a finger on the wheel, if you will, to be able to steer it a little bit. So I think that they need to be careful in doing that. Let's see what else you guys are saying here in the chat. Raymond, now that I am in my 50s, I am definitely seeing the value of life experience and also how immature I was, right? Even people who come off as very wise beyond their years. You ask those people when they're 40 what they were like in their 20s, and they'll just be like, man, you don't even know. I was so dumb, or I made so many mistakes. Well, maybe wait until they're 40 rather than platforming them when they're 20. And I did a vetting process myself. Just out of curiosity, I vetted on Google speakers at various Christian festivals in 2019 to 2021. I found multiple speakers being platformed that were on probation. Oh, man. One was a registered sex offender. I listened to his online sermon, and it was great, but he was indeed a sex offender. Pretty big deal. Vetting not getting nowheres. Typing on a live stream, it doesn't matter. This showed me how little venues are vetting and or how much venues do not care about people's history. I completely agree. Like you can do background research very easily right now with Google, and you could probably find out quite a bit. That's really what's happening here, over here with things going on with Andy Wood. It's because he's popular now, because he's going to be taking over this huge church, that people are beginning to like pay attention to what he's done in the past. And they're just Googling stuff. They're using his own Instagram to be like, wait, what? Like they're just looking. And I feel like that's something that every institution should be able to do with those who are going to be speaking and be platformed there. So I feel like this is something that we could all learn from. This is something that we should be doing for ourselves. Maybe even like if you're thinking about going to a conference, maybe do a little bit of vetting yourself like Ann was doing and say, all right, well, let's look up some of these guys. Like even just a search of this person's name and plagiarism. Plagiarism is stealing. Stealing is wrong. It's sinful. If it's an ongoing thing, that person is unqualified for ministry. I don't care who they are. I don't care what they're the president of. They're unqualified for that position. And if you're a pastor and you're doing that, you're unqualified. So even looking up things like that would be extremely helpful to know whether this person is qualified to be platformed in such a way, to be looked at as, this is like the mark that we are supposed to meet. And that's kind of what happens when it comes to some of these conferences. And even if that's not intentional, that's what happens. And I think people need to be wise about that. Well, that's about it for today. I'm trying to get a little bit shorter with my streams for Theo Live, so I'm going to end it before I keep on rambling about the same thing over and over again. I hope that this was helpful for you. If you are still here and you haven't hit the like button, please do that. It does tell YouTube to go knock on the door of somebody and let them know that Dean had a video come out, so it makes a big difference. If you are new to the channel and you have not subscribed, please do that. I do this every Monday. I have this Theo Live show going every Monday live. So, like if you like this kind of stuff, I do it every Monday. Every Wednesday, I have another video come out. And then Fridays, I do another stream, a little bit more laid back. This Friday is going to be Bible rhythms. So that's just me doing basically a Bible study, more laid back, and we can have a little bit of dialogue as we do that live. So be on the lookout for that. Also today, I never talk about this, and it's still growing, so that helps me in like just a little bit of just being like, oh, that's so cool. But I have a newsletter that comes out on the 15th of every month. And so today is the 15th. So in just a couple hours, I'll be dropping that newsletter. There is a link down below to sign up for that newsletter. What you're going to get is just a little blurb, basically, like a couple paragraphs about what I'm doing with the channel, a little bit of an update. You'll get some links that I found helpful, some tweets that I think are really good, and an exclusive video. That's probably the biggest thing, the most important thing for you. An exclusive video. I've been dropping the newest videos of my best books series. I've been dropping that through the newsletter. It's an exclusive for those people. So if you sign up for the newsletter, you'll get the link later on today to a new video that no one else on my channel can watch except for those people who have the link through the newsletter. So check that out. Also, tomorrow I'll be making last month's best books video live. So I'll be premiering that tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for that stuff. Sign up for the newsletter. Thanks for being here. I appreciate everyone who's been in the chat today. Appreciate your perspectives. Let me know down in the comments what you think about this if you're watching the replay, and I'll see you later on in the week. I hope you have a great rest of your Monday.